Courtney, have I resolved your issue?
Well, I'm just now hearing you for the first time. So
Yeah,
if you guys have
I
been going for 9 minutes, I haven't heard any of it.
do you need to hear the introduction?
I usually take it down, but I don't have, I mean, it's whatever you want. I can hear now though. I can start from here.
This is John. I couldn't hear either. So none of that is a matter of record at this point. So my suggestion would be at least do the introduction so that it is a matter of record.
Mr. Chair, would you mind rereading all of what you've done? Thank you.
For the city attorney, just a quick question. If this is a continuance of the last matter, isn't it still on the record from last time? Is there a need to re-enter or can we just continue or should we reread it?
You make an excellent point. The fact that not having heard prior, I didn't know what was going on. But yes, you're absolutely right because those were entered in the record at the last meeting. I would agree with you. So they're an excellent point. No need to do that.
So should I start from right now or wait?
You can start from right now. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
So saves me from reading 5 pages again. Everyone's welcome.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm sure everybody enjoys it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine they wouldn't want to hear it again.
So Ms. Keefe, we'll start with introducing the petition as you were getting ready to do. That's
Okay, so my apologies. But am I just starting at the front of the
that's the
presentation?
presentation, correct?
All right. So the subject site this evening is located primarily on the south side of Witsits Fork Road, which is a private road maintained by the Witsits Fork Roadway Maintenance Association. It is located west of Highway 109 in the southern portion of Wildwood. The subject lot is 12.67 acres in size, and it's zoned floodplain non-urban residence district. 410 feet of it has frontage on Witsits Fork Road. The lot is irregularly shaped and is primarily well-maintained pasture with a small northern portion of it that is steeply sloped across the road to the north of the road, and it's heavily wooded there. The property has several small outbuildings upon it that were illegally constructed by a previous owner. The petitioner is requesting to construct a new single-family dwelling and related improvements within the defined 100-year floodplain boundary. They are requesting a 0-foot setback from the required 50-foot setback from that defined floodplain boundary. The design of the home indicates that the low sill elevation is 2 feet above the base floodplain elevation of Carr Creek, which defines the southern boundary of the lot. When originally platted, there was an area of it that was flood free, but the new FEMA flood maps show that almost the entirety of the lot is now encumbered by floodplain. The flood events of 2015 and 2017 on the Merrimack River led to the flooding of this property and surrounding properties. And any property built in this lot may still be subject to intermittent flooding. The immediate area is utilized for single family residences and related accessory structures. Floodplain designated properties generally do not have any structures, pasture, and open space, and maybe some non-habitable accessory structures are typically permitted there. In order to build in a floodplain area, the city does have a number of requirements, including no rise certification, special setback distances for the structures, low sill provisions, and authorization from the Director of Public Works, who is also the city's floodplain administrator. If this variance is to be approved, it would authorize the single family dwelling it would authorize a single family dwelling upon this lot, whereas right now, it would be very difficult to position one upon it. The intent of the petitioner is to raise the building site higher than the 100 floodplain elevation. This is the site plan submitted to the department by the petitioner. There are a few relevant lines on the drawing. There is the defined base floodplain boundary in blue. And the highlighted, this is the effective floodplain boundary, the 100-year floodplain. This highlighted blue, whoops, I apologize. Got a little too zealous with my pointer. This highlighted blue line here is the preliminary floodplain boundary that has not yet been adopted. But it does show where floodplain is expected on the lot, and it is currently being considered by the state. Since the last hearing on this matter, the petitioner has submitted some new information to the department. They've done some additional studies that took into account some of the suggestions by this board, which would include how fill is placed on the lot and some of that matter. But what they have concluded is that to address it in that matter, it would actually result in a worse situation than a better one. And I'm sure they can explain it better than I can because so I will let the petitioner speak to these studies. This is a perspective looking south upon the lot. This is looking north. This is looking west upon Whitsett Fork Road. This is looking east upon Whitsett Fork Road. This is looking east on the eastern portion of the subject property, looking south. This is looking southeast at some of the outbuildings. This is looking west at the neighboring property on the western portion of the lot. And this is looking south, but upon the western portion of the subject property. This is looking south. And this reflects the public support for the request. Thus far, the department has received 11 comments opposed, one in support, and one that was neutral to the request. And that concludes my presentation at this time. If you have any questions for the department, we are available to answer them. Thank you.
I do. You had one slide up there, maybe it was from the engineering company that tried to show Carr Street and all that stuff. Are we gonna have a chance to talk to them about, okay. then
Yes,
you don't need
that's the idea, is to have the engineers explain those studies
that
to
is.
you.
Yeah, okay. Do we know what the base flood elevation actually is? Like what the number is?
Mr. Sprunger, certainly the engineer can provide it, but if you look at the information that's been provided, generally speaking, it's the base floodplain. The effective one is around 441. It varies. The new one is around 444.5 or 445.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was, but I didn't want to assume that was the case. So we see that about a 3-foot rise from the previous floodplain level to now, to what the current one is, or the new one.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And again, it varies, but I think on the high end, so to speak, it's about 3 feet. Can be anywhere from from 0 to about 3 feet, depending on the position that you're at on the lot.
Right. I think the point is testimony from last month. I think the residents were articulating that it seems like the flooding is getting maybe more frequent and maybe even more severe. And this would almost bear witness to the fact that, you know, whoever puts these maps together, you know, is acknowledging the fact that the flooding seems to be getting worse.
And certainly, I think what we're seeing, let me preface my statement, and then certainly I would want Mr. Brown, our floodplain administrator, but since 2017, we haven't had a major flood on the Merrimack River. We had 2 of the largest flood events within a couple of years of each other, 2015, 2017. Then we've kind of been in a lull. I would not expect that to continue. So yes,
Mhm.
the Merrimack River is untamed as far as the Department of Planning is concerned. We also have Carr Creek and Hamilton Creek, and they are subject to flooding as well. And those are generally from what I would consider high intensity, short duration storms,
Mhm.
like the one that was referenced in testimony at the May meeting that occurred in August of 2019. So all of that has to be taken into account. The no rise certification, and again, this is for Mr. Brown, is premised on the creek, not the Merrimack River.
So do we know how many floods, say even since 2000, or you can go 2010, but you know, since 2000, how many floods have there been that actually hit the 100-year floodplain? Do we know? Do we have any idea?
I don't know without doing further research. Mr. Brown is checking, I think, on his computer to see if there's information readily available, but that would probably,
Yeah.
but that would probably be something that would take a little more time for us to
Okay.
research.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a sense of, you know, these events in theory are supposed to happen, you know, only once in 100 years, but if it seems to be happening a lot more frequently than that, then I think we have to pause a little bit about development in the floodplain, or the fringe of the floodplain, I should say.
And I think the 100-year notation kind of gives some sense of safety. It's really, there's a 1% chance each year that there'll be a flood of that magnitude.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for the department before we hear for the petitioner? Okay, will the petitioner please come forward, state his or her name, address, relationship to the property, and we'll get you sworn in by the court reporter.
Good evening, Board. Doug Nance, Lombardo Homes, 4 Research Park, St. Charles, Missouri, 63304. I'm on behalf of the client. I'm the builder, developer.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Mr. Nance. Anything new? I know we have some new studies and some other
So
things.
I'll bring Chris Keister up here to just discuss the graph that you're seeing here in the study that was done, who's with TWM and did this study. But just to reiterate, TWM and Chris is the one who did the original study that showed no rise at the time. And when my client, again, I just want to reiterate, bought this piece of property and thought he could build his dream home at that time, as we saw, the existing floodplain 100-year, it's not affected by where his house is going. The future lines they're going to that he was not aware of at the time. Now we're being held to that standard, which we're following all the guidelines from FEMA and from the city. to show the reports that what we're going to do is not showing any rise to any effect of any of the neighbors in the surrounding based on that study. So the study that Chris is going to come up here and he can discuss a little bit more. He's a little bit more in tune to this, but basically he's showing based off your all's recommendation at the last meeting, what could possibly be done if it would do anything at all, grading wise, to try to help with some like compensatory storage or something like that, or some drainage in that area. And basically what we found is there's an area that could be done. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to do, because really you're just creating a bigger problem, because you're only going to have about 0.5% fall, which is pretty flat. So water's just going to sit there if we were to remove this dirt, and cause probably even a larger problem. But he's the technical guy and he can talk a little bit.
Please state your name, address, relation to the property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Chris Keister, TWM Engineering. Address is 4940 Old Collinsville Road, Swansea, Illinois, 62226. As Mr. Nance noted, we're the engineering firm that provided the hydraulic report and the no-rise calculations.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Keister.
So Mr. Nance kind of covered some of this, and I know we spent the last meeting discussing it. The exhibit that's behind you is an additional graphical depiction of what the hydraulic study and the no-rise calculation showed. So this cross-section is taken through the center of the proposed home. This is the new section that was added in our hydraulic report. When we developed that study, we were given SEMA's HECRAS calculations through which they generated their preliminary 100-year floodplain elevations. There was not a section through the subject property. So in our calculations, we ran SEMA's model. We then added a cross-section, I believe a couple of slides ago that was shown a little bit better. Yes. In this slide, you can see the different cross-sections that exist in the model. The section in blue, 1597, bisects the subject property. So if you can go back to the cross-section. This is the section through the home. In our model, we use the results of a topographic survey and county LiDAR data to develop the existing topography, which is what's shown here in the dashed line. Then with the proposed grading for the home on the left side of the screen, that is what's shown in the darker solid line that has kind of a triangular shape. That's the finished floor for the building and the building pad. We then also showed what the 100-year high water elevation is. So that would be the higher level based on the new SEMA preliminary flood map. And so that worked out to approximately 442.8. We also, for the sake of this discussion, showed the 500-year floodplain. There had been some discussion in the last meeting about that. So there are two elevations shown on this cross section. There's the 100-year and then there's the 500-year. Based on this cross section, and again, this is just a better graphical depiction of the study that was completed in February. The 100-year is shown for all intents and purposes, staying loosely within the channel of Carr Creek. The 500-year floodplain elevation is several feet higher, just because that is a flood of lower probability, greater flow rate. So as Mr. Nance mentioned, with the hydraulic study and the no-rise calculations for that 100-year floodplain study, there was no rise shown between the existing and proposed conditions. And that's shown a little bit better in this exhibit where the home is built outside of that 100-year floodplain. There's some discrepancies between how the graphical depiction is noted in SEMA's map. And I believe that's mostly due to the fact that their model is developed off of LiDAR. we were able to supplement that LiDAR with our topographic survey with what's shown here. The 500-year floodplain elevation, which is shown, is impacted by the building's building pad. That results in a small increase in the 500-year floodplain elevation because there is fill that's being placed in that 500-year floodplain. The other item that Mr. Nance noted is looking at potentially being able to remove fill from the floodplain. Mr. Lee, I believe that was your recommendation last time. And that is a valid way and one that's commonly used in floodplain analysis, trying to remove fill when fill is placed. What we looked at is due to the flat nature of this site, there isn't much opportunity to remove fill. We've got sketched in red on this exhibit an area that we felt could be removed, but as Mr. Nance noted, when that fill is removed, you're left with a running grade along that ground of approximately 0.5%. Typically in a grass situation, you're looking at 1.5% to 2% that would allow this to freely drain. So while this would help in the event of a 500-year flood, this does cause some issues with day-to-day drainage with more common rainfall events and leaving stagnating water in the backyard. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, I do. I apologize. I can't read what's on your graph here. So maybe you can just kind of help me. So there's like these two blue lines.
Correct.
Okay, what's the bottom blue line? The short one, this one right here.
There you go.
Yes, that is the 100-year high water elevation within Park Creek.
That's the 100-year base flood elevation.
Correct. With the new mapping from SEMA, the preliminary mapping.
With the new mapping.
The next one.
Well, now. And this is where we're talking about building, is that right?
Correct.
That doesn't even look like it's in the floodplain.
And like I said, that's part of the issue with the graphical depiction of these new maps. So when we ran our study, we matched the elevations that SEMA showed in their model. However, like I said, a new section was introduced into the model. That was the one we created and the one that's shown here. I can't speak to where SEMA's data was derived for the topography and how they graphically depicted that floodplain. But this elevation does show that the home is outside that 100-year floodplain. And again, this is based on the elevations within the model. The graphical depiction, the one that shows the orange and the blue limits that we had up on the screen earlier, I can't say where SEMA developed that line work, but this is based on a topographic survey of the lot, the analysis that SEMA did, supplementing that analysis. And ultimately that elevation is what's shown on the no rise calculations within the hydraulic report.
Yeah, so you're going to be submitting a LOMAR and you'll have this data go in and then they can evaluate what they did. Because you said it was probably based off an aerial survey and you got actual topographical.
Correct. So we have topographical survey through the lot itself. So all of this section was not surveyed by our firm, but the portion within the property was. So there's the LiDAR data, and then we essentially pasted our topography that we surveyed into that section. And that's referred to as the corrected effective condition in FEMA's vocabulary.
So just so everybody understands this, the LOMAR approval would either agree with this if it's approved, or they would take exception to it when you go do your letter of map revision.
Yes. So in this case, what we will be applying for is a letter of map revision based on fill. And what that allows a petitioner to do is say that they will be placing fill within the floodplain, but outside of the floodway. So within the flood fringe. With the way that FEMA typically reviews these documents, they are usually going off the effective mapping. So in this case, that's the base floodplain elevation that is lower than the preliminary values that we've been using throughout this study. But in order to apply for the LOMRF, we need community acknowledgement. So this process will obviously inform that.
Well, if in fact, after your analysis has been completed, that the building is outside of the 1% floodplain, then okay, hold that thought just for a second. When you say a no rise, are you talking about no rise above the BFE, the base flood elevation? Is that what you're saying, the no rises?
Yes,
Or-
no
or off the-
rise of the base floodplain elevation between the existing present day conditions and what will happen when the home is constructed. So it's a comparison of the existing and proposed conditions for that 100-year high water elevation.
And you're able to say that because you think that, when I say you think, your analysis or whatever doesn't even have the building in the 100-year floodplain.
Yes,
Is that correct?
that is correct. And again, what isn't shown in FEMA's hydraulic model is this section. So this section was introduced into the model. So in our hydraulic report, we have a section that kind of notes the process for how that was done, looking at SEMA's model as it currently stands today on their public website, and then what happens after this new section was introduced in the existing conditions and then in the proposed conditions.
So if you did a LOMAR, then would this whole issue change dramatically? Because now you're not even in the floodplain.
And in that case, it comes down to how FEMA has their floodplain depicted horizontally. We've had issues with LOMARs in the past where it's clear based on site topography that the floodplain depicted on a map is not accurate. However, because FEMA is bound by their graphical depiction, we've had to go through various sets of calculations similar to this. In this case, this would have been a good exhibit to show in a little bit more detail last time, but it wasn't ready at that point.
Okay. And if FEMA were to approve the LOMAR and agree with you and say, yeah, you're right, then this whole question wouldn't even be a question.
Essentially, yes. But in order to have this go before FEMA's review, we need the city of Wildwood's agreement that it meets local codes. And then at that point, once we have that community acknowledgement, there's a sign off on the form, and then it can go to FEMA.
But that local acknowledgement doesn't rely on whether or not this case is approved or denied. Is that correct?
Well, in the issue here with the setback from the floodplain, that is not a FEMA requirement. FEMA's requirement looks at this in a vertical sense, the lowest opening in the building versus the base floodplain elevation. And so from that standpoint, my belief is that this would be approved by FEMA. However many local ordinances have requirements above and beyond what FEMA lays out. So in this case, the floodplain setback, the national standard by FEMA is 1 foot between the base floodplain elevation and the lowest opening of the building. In this case, in Wildwood, it's 2 feet. So that's part of that community acknowledgement that happens, is ensuring that local standards that may be more stringent are met.
Again, because I can't read it, define what's this showing us? How far out of that is it showing?
The proposed
The
grading. you mean?
proposed, correct, the
Yeah.
100-year to the proposed building.
So, Mr. Sprunger, your pen was just at about section You were about section 750. Looking at the horizontal sections on the bottom.
I mean, if you go,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
So,
yeah, it's hard to read.
so it's. Yeah, but in this case, looking at the horizontal distance,
You'd
that
have
would
to
be
go over-
approximately 200, right, about
Right.
200 feet.
They'll start somewhere.
Where your pen was right now, next to the note. And then
This
every
is-
one of those grid lines going left to right is 50 feet.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Brown and I have been discussing the question Mr. Sprunger posed. And from the code's perspective, until the LOMAR is approved by the federal government, our maps still reflect that this is floodplain. So there is still a need for the consideration beyond just the setback as the engineer just described.
Wait, Mr. Lee?
So just to make this clear, the letter of map revision that the applicant will be submitting will either pass or fail. There's no gray area here. So the city then can take that result and follow through with what is needed from the process standpoint. And all other issues are on the construction set of construction drawings. This is simply zoning for the setback, but it's required for the LOMAR is required in order for it to move the next step. Am I correct, Joe? Is that
Well, certainly the setback is a local requirement specific to the city of Wildwood. So yes, the board must consider that particular component of the advertisement. From the standpoint of the LOMAR, if the request is approved and the LOMAR is submitted, then they'll have local authorization, so the LOMAR can be submitted. And then if the LOMAR is approved, then the area will not be indicated as being in floodplain.
So does it? Can they submit a request for a LOMAR regardless of? I'm still a little fuzzy on that. Can they just say, nah, we're going to go for the LOMAR right now? And, you know, if we get the LOMAR, if that gets approved, then you don't even need the variance.
Again, and I'll defer to the engineer, but if local authorization is required relative to the city's requirements for floodplain development, the city would need to address the 50-foot setback requirement. As that is a local requirement, not related to FEMA or any of their floodplain act.
But if a LOMAR was requested and approved by FEMA, they still, okay, that changes the line, the 1% floodplain. Then is, you see where I'm going with this?
The dog that wags the tail, meaning the 50-foot setback, would follow the new 100-year floodplain elevation.
Correct. So they would still have to be within, you know, they had to be 50 feet outside of that 100-foot floodplain
Under our local code.
under Wildwood's local code.
So Director Muniz, you laid out an approval, then goes in front of LOMAR, gets approved, is out of floodplain. Approval here, LOMAR gets denied, then what? What does that scenario look like?
Well, I can't theorize what the property owner might undertake, but certainly based upon this new section and the site-specific topographic information, it would appear that if fill is authorized and the LOMAR is submitted and approved, then again, there might not be a need for the 50-foot setback variance
If it's denied.
if it's denied.
So if the community involvement piece to the LOMAR is approved here, it then goes to the LOMAR, goes in front of FEMA, FEMA denies it. What happens to this site?
I don't have very much experience with
To
the letter of map revisions, the LOMARs, the few that the departments participated in. Generally, if the engineering supports it, it's approved by the federal government. I would defer to Mr. Brown.
I think my reaction is that the process that we have in place provides for a variance to be granted by the board. If you grant that variance, that's likely going to authorize the development regardless of the loan.
that's what I was looking for. Okay.
And one other thing I'd like to add as far as the LOMAR process goes, which is again through FEMA, through the national agency. It revises the map, but it revises the map in the sense that it removes a certain area of the site. There was a map that was shown earlier where that's given in a meets and bounds description, but it removes that area from the floodplain. And then in that case, the homeowner is not subject to carrying flood insurance. So that's another component, and really the big component with the way that the LOMAR process works with FEMA. The local review, as we've said, that still holds and that's still important. But one of the big components that comes out of the LOMAR based on fill process is showing that this home is out of the floodplain, and then for banking, financing, those sorts of things, floodplain insurance is not required as a condition of obtaining a mortgage, obtaining a loan, something like that.
On this map here, assuming this preliminary change in map is accepted, where's the buildable area on this lot? Assuming you follow this and say, we're going to stay out of the floodplain, no variance needed.
Yes.
Where would that be?
So the buildable area, there, the tighter proposed. Is it over here?
No, that's
Well,
This, you're saying that it's,
so the buildable area would be something like this.
that would be the buildable area.
Correct.
It would be outside of the floodplain. If the LOMARs,
no, not the LOMAR, barring any kind of LOMAR, just if you said, hey, I'm going to follow this, I'm going to adapt this new map and assume that that's going to be the case. I want to stay out of the floodplain. Where would you build?
well, they can't,
Be.
they can't.
It'd have to be here, right?
Well, but there's a road.
Then you're going to hit, but then you're going to hit easements and other issues. So essentially there,
And then,
the setbacks, there is essentially no.
correct, but then that
Area.
also goes back to the cross section that was shown where our so again, the limits of the 100-year base floodplain elevation sit right about here.
So your no rise certification is assuming that lower blue line. When you say it's a no rise, you're saying it's not there anymore, but the diagram with the creek and all.
It's not saying that it's not there. It's saying that, sorry, I keep switching back and forth.
There we go. When you say there's no rise, are you saying no rise on this?
No rise, there's no change in the 100-year high water elevation, the base floodplain elevation,
Based on your,
based on this proposed grading happening. And
Right,
that's-
and what FEMA's new map
Yes,
is, okay, there's not what you would be requesting on the Lomar, it's what is the new proposed BFE.
correct.
Okay, and you're
The-
saying there's no rise on that
Yes, and the
Okay.
reason for that is because
because you think it's wrong.
Well,
Because you think the house is actually above that.
what
Or
I'm
that-
saying is that the elevation that's shown here, so this is looking at the elevations. This elevation that's shown right now in this cross section.
Explain
Okay. So the HEC-RAS analysis that's done assumes that water is moving from west to east along Carter Creek. So it's moving past the site. There are hydraulic cross sections built perpendicular to the channel. And so in the model that SEMA has available right now, the preliminary mapping, section 1971 is part of that model, and section 1222 is part of that model. If you go on to SEMA's website right now, they have a Google Drive where you can download these files. Anybody can play around with them if they really wanted to. However, there was no section in that model where the proposed home was going to be. So because of that, there was no way for us to simulate between the existing conditions, what's out there present day, and what will happen in the proposed. If we kept that model as is, it would essentially assume that everything was the same because we did not have a hydraulic section where the home was going to be. So in our analysis, we copied SEMA's model, added section 1597, and then ran that in both the existing conditions, which use the results of a topographic survey, which will give more detail than what flown LiDAR elevation would, and then adding the proposed grading to the site. And so that's what's shown in this cross section that we've been discussing.
So a couple questions from my end, getting away from maybe the no rise situation. So I think last time I had concern over the flow going down from the other side of the road, since there's the elevation.
Yes.
And there were some reports that during heavy rains, the road would become flooded and then it would wash north to south, I guess. The report you just mentioned assumed Carr Creek flowing west to east, but have you accounted for any flow rate from going downhill? Because we had talked about where the culvers were.
Right.
There could be a deposit of water there. I mean, I'm just finding it difficult to believe that if you build basically a T here and have an elevation here, how you're not gonna have water pooling down this way, and creating a body of water here that's not gonna have sufficient flow rate there.
Yes. So it's shown in this drawing, and then it's shown in better detail on some of the plans that were submitted. There are, I believe it's 4 36-inch culverts beneath the driveway. So any flow that is currently going through the lot from west to east will be able to use those culverts to be able to continue to flow. So the question about flows coming from the north in the wooded area down towards the road, that is a concern. However, it's not part of the floodplain no rise calculations that were done here, in the sense that we're looking at the conditions in Carr Creek and the changes that the proposed conditions would have here. So it's something that needs to be considered based on what you're saying. However, then that really comes down to a road maintenance issue as opposed to the issue that the variance is being requested for, which is the floodplain setback. Is my take on that.
Well, the second part of the questions would be, is the site selection, I'm looking at the topographical map and with the placement of the house, you know, there's a long driveway with the circle. Why was the house set back so far instead of asking for it to be pushed up closer to the road and then asking for a variance on the front part of the floodplain as opposed to the back corner? in the way I'm reading it is you could avoid a bunch of the flow rate issues if the house is moved closer to the road at a possibly lower elevation that's more consistent with the houses down the street. So instead of pushing water towards them, it would be kind of the current topography maintained. Does that make sense?
It does. So in terms of the home placement, that has to do with the applicant's preferred location for the home. But again, based on what we're showing from the hydraulic calculations in SEMA's model, the graphical depiction that SEMA gives doesn't appear to match up with the topographic survey, because the grading for the home runs here, and then the 100-year high water elevation is located 200 to 250 feet away.
Well, so the concern in my mind then is that you're asking for a variance in one location that could create potential risk to a next door neighbor, whereas you could ask for a variance in a different location that would minimize that risk. So unless you can give us assurances as to that risk level being on par, why should we be inclined to grant it one way but not the other?
And when you say variant or location, are you speaking about this specific lot, or are you speaking about different locations?
The placement of the house on the lot. So instead of the front door being where it is, why not put it right where the circle drive is and avoid the circle drive and have a shorter driveway? And then ask for a variance for where it would impinge on the easement in the front rather than the floodplain in the back.
Right.
I mean, you need a variance either way, but in my mind, that variance would create less risk to the neighbors than the other variance. So why should we approve it this way is what my concern is.
As far as approving it this way, it's because we've submitted the calculations based on SEMA's mapping and what we've been discussing in the section. As far as the home placement, again, that comes down to the petitioner's desires. One of the things is trying to elevate the home above the 100-year high water elevation. So while we've shown that it's set back per the city of Wildwood's requirements, there still needs to be that 2 feet of vertical clearance between the base floodplain elevation and the lowest opening. In this case, the applicant is asking for the lowest opening to be a walkout basement. So that requires the driveway to cover a greater vertical distance from Witsett's Fork to the home itself. If that's located closer to the road, that slope becomes steeper, whereas pulling it out further south from the road allows for a more gradual climb up the driveway.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
With your permission. Board Member Lux, recognizing some of the concerns of the board, as well as some of the comments from the speakers at the May meeting, the department did add another condition to its report. And for the most part, the condition says that the applicant is required to address current drainage issues along Witsett Fork Road, particularly in the northwest corner of the subject lot. Positive drainage should be provided in this regard and eliminate ponding or standing water. And we understood the concerns at the last meeting, both from the board and the residents in the vicinity, and tried to address it as best we could that way.
So when you say address the current drainage, what would be the output of that if we were to put a contingency on it? I mean, is there a certain satisfaction to the neighbors, signing off on it or report? Like, what would be the outcome or the output to move that contingency off the checklist?
From the perspective of the department, and again, I can't speak for the Department of Public Works, but we would expect the engineer to provide a plan signed and sealed that indicates that if the existing problem relative to the vacant lot is addressed, so there's not standing water in the northwest corner of it, and then to guarantee that the 3 culvert pipes and any flow coming across Witsett Fork north to south is captured by either a ditch, a swale, something, and follows its natural pattern to the east.
Thank you.
Actually,
So I have a question. This may be more for city staff, but as far as construction drawings go, which occur after any kind of a zoning approval, does the city review the site construction drawings? Because I know the county does all building applications, but is the city reviewing this site? I just want to make clarification for that.
Very much so. There's a multiple step process now with the Departments of Planning and Public Works. Planning reviews the issues relating to setbacks, heights, lighting, etc. Public Works does all of the grading, floodplain components. And in certain instances, we, as we did here, engage a third-party independent engineer to verify that we've done our job and have, for the most part, ensured that the property from the perspective of the owner and living there is safe, but also those in the vicinity.
I don't know if this is a question from you, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but so is this property gonna be, are they gonna have a well, a private well? And are they gonna have their own private sewage treatment?
I do not know the answer to that.
Mr. Nance, can we be able to weigh in on the infrastructure?
That is correct. It will have a well and a septic system on this property as well.
And where will that be located at?
So there's area right in here that's out of the floodplain that we've analyzed, and it has the correct setbacks in order to get the septic system in behind the house. And then the well usually goes on the opposite side.
Yeah.
The septic. So it'll be somewhere right around here probably,
So the septic system will be outside of the
outside of the floodplain.
floodplain?
Floodplain is what we analyzed.
And Board Member Schmunger, that's a requirement of the code. Septic and drain field can't be in the floodplain.
It would make sense, you know.
And it can't be put on fill either, so it's not like we can bring it up and bring it back. So that's where we.
From the building and design perspective, any statement as to the location of the house on the plot?
So
Is-
like.
We heard preference, but
Yeah. I mean, some of it is preference, but we're also set at obviously floodplain elevation. So we got the basement floor has to be at that elevation, so we have to go up from there. So with a 9 foot or even an 8 foot, we're fixed on this 8 foot above that 2 foot mark. So it's 442, I think we said we're at basically it's 451. I'm fixed on that for the top of elevation, and then I have to go from there out to the road. So try to set your driveway at a certain percentage. Usually it's around 8%, so you don't have too much. You can go a little higher than that. So we're really working with fixed points, and also trying to address, I mean, you got a lot of drainage that has to go through the front of this lot too. So the more I pull this house forward, the steeper the driveway is going to get because I can't lower the house any. And then I'm pushing all that drainage even closer to the road, trying to capture all that with the 4 pipes right now with 36-inch pipes. So you're gonna, if you start pulling that house forward, steeper driveway, and we're basically putting a choke point on the drainage as well. And getting drainage even closer to the house with the amount of water that's gonna be in there.
if there was not a walkout basement, what would that do to the buildup requirements? Would that
So
lower the height?
You're still gonna be at that fixed elevation height for the
Okay.
top of foundation. And what it's gonna require is more fill on the lot. Cause I gotta bring that dirt all the way.
Mhm.
If it was in grade, let's just call it in grade, I bring dirt 8 foot up. And then feather it out at 3-to-1 slope, or I mean, if they want to be a little backyard, and I gotta show that. So this minimizes the amount of fill that's really going on the lot.
So if you're coming toward the road, just to follow up maybe on Board Member Lux's questions. I mean, it looks like grade wise, you're coming up, right?
Mhm.
So is the house not coming up with it? I mean, I'm not sure if I quite get why you have a steeper
First,
rise.
because you come up on ground level and then we're talking about a walkout basement, which is
Oh, for the
lower.
walkout basement.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else, Mr. Keister? Seeing none, we will now open the floor to speakers in the audience or online that want to speak in favor or opposition to the request. Again, online, please raise your hand. If you're here in person, please hand Ms. Keefe speaker's card and we'll get it going.
Mr. Chair, I do have one speaker's card from Eric Teagarden.
Good evening, Mr. Teagarden. If you could please state your name, address, relationship to this petition, and we'll get you sworn in.
Sure. Hi, Eric Teagarden, 3340 Witsits Fork Road in Wildwood. And I'm the next door neighbor on the south end of the property.
Get you sworn in.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Proceed.
So I wrote some stuff out. A fair amount of it's no longer relevant based on kind of what we heard today. So probably have to go a little bit off script here for what I wrote. But and I brought this up the last meeting too, and I don't know that anyone's really talked about it, but my first preference for all of this would be to not grant the variance. I don't think anyone's really followed up on the potential for building on the north side of the property, because my understanding from what was said earlier is that's part of the reason for granting the variance. Is if you don't grant the variance, the property is not usable as a residential parcel, and so there is space on the north side of the property. I'm not as familiar with the ordinances to know what all the setbacks are and whatnot. I do know anecdotally my house is on the north side of the property and in a similar sized area, and so that's, I think, to me, a way that the property could be used for a residential area without any floodplain variance being granted, and maybe possibly some setback variances being granted. I do like the notion of I think what Mr. Lux, I believe, mentioned about can we go closer to the property or to the road instead and get a variance for that instead of building as further out in the floodplain. Although I acknowledge that some of the discussions with this level of the driveway may make that moot. I don't know that I agree with the assertion that removing the basement would change the level of fill. It may be because my understanding is that the sill height is the driving factor for where we're at. If the basement doesn't have a walkout, then I think the sill height would be at the first floor, although I could be wrong there. But regardless, the property could also be built with a slab and have no basement whatsoever, and that would bring the level down significantly, which would also allow the property to move, or the building to move closer to the road. And so, even if that's still in the floodplain, it would be a significant reduction in the area. And I understand that the engineer that has the hydraulic calculations that show that apparently the floodplain doesn't reach anywhere near the house. I can tell you anecdotally, that's extremely untrue based on recent years. And it's possible that those are freak events that we're having multiple 1% floods on a 3-year basis. But that seems a little unlikely to me. And so, while I see that the assertion is that the FEMA topography was less precise, and they created the new cross section with LiDAR in the area there, that it doesn't seem to me to match with recent actual history. I also have some, and I don't know if there's a way to have back and forth questions with the engineer. I'm curious if the cross section, if it was developed with just LiDAR only at that cross section, and if there were data taken either side of that versus, and I don't know if the calculation involves taking the adjacent cross sections into account. I'm curious if doing a different methodology for generating the cross section at one location is going to yield erroneous results versus an interpolation between the two cross sections and then only adding the new fill on. But I don't know if there's a good way to have a back and forth conversation with the engineer here.
We'll
but
certainly ask them on your behalf.
Let's see. The other thing of note is, I know we talked last meeting about concerns about the adjacent neighbor's property and that being built up and how that played into the no rise. And that might have been a moot point because the analysis was showing flood water didn't get anywhere near there in the first place, but it doesn't look like, the cross section that was added was in an area that would have addressed it. Again, I don't know the specifics of how that calculation happens and if that matters at all, but it doesn't sound to me like that was taken into consideration, whether relevant or not. Let's see. And the other thing I guess I'll note, and again, I'm not sure how the calculations get done. And because I believe trees are at least part of how the no rise portion is calculated. There's been about 16 additional trees that have been planted on the property since the last meeting. I don't know if those are accounted for in the calculation or if they matter. Just figured I would mention it. So I guess to summarize, my opinion is that you should not grant the variance because the north side is developable. I was going to originally suggest going a cut and fill approach, but it sounds like the engineering has indicated that that's not a viable option. So I guess I would like to suggest that if we do grant the variance, that we or that you require that the building be placed closer to the road and omit basement in order to reduce the impact to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teagarden. I'm thinking the best approach may be to kind of get through the speakers and then Mr. Keister and Mr. Nance, if you want to just kind of keep your thoughts together, we'll jot them down as well. And then if there's anything you want to address afterwards, we'll be happy to call you back up. That way we kind of keep things going.
Mr. Chair, I was just handed a speaker card from Ms. Bromeyer. Linda Bromeyer.
Okay. Go ahead and come up, Mrs. Bromeyer. If you could please state your name, address, relationship to this variance or property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Linda Bromeyer at 3348 Witsit Fork Road. And I'm a neighbor about 3 houses down from this property, and we have had water come very close to our backyard with flooding a few years ago.
Just a moment, we'll get you sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I would like to say that I agree with Eric Teagarden. I feel that this house could be set closer to the road and it should be built on a slab, so there's not a need to make a little mountain of dirt that will certainly displace water around it. I have lived on this road for 24 years. We've seen water come within 40 feet of our house. I'm very concerned that that giant mound of dirt will deflect water sufficient to cause problems for us. You have ordinances about flooding to protect the neighborhood. I'm in the neighborhood. I think that protecting the neighbors from having all their houses flooded is more important than one person's preference for a walkout basement and a longer driveway. It's quite possible that he could build this with a slab and a shorter driveway closer to the road and not have this giant mound of dirt that is a great concern as far as how much water it's going to displace.
Thank you, Ms. Bromeyer. Another speaker, Ms. Key.
Mr. Chair, Brett and Nancy Miller.
And come up, Millers. If you could state your name, address, relationship to this property, and we'll get you sworn in, Mr. Miller.
Brett Miller, 3326 Woodsets Fork. I'm the next door neighbor.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause would be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Oh. Yeah, it's to Kevin's, point, is the watershed. And I think you guys addressed it a little bit in putting a culvert or something over there in that northwest corner. We did a lot of engineering. We built our house on how to move water around, and because there's 3 troughs that drain from east to west, on there, excuse me, from west to east, on there, which we disturbed. And then we re-engineered the water flow, and now we're potentially having to re-engineer again. So that was just my caution and concern was the watershed, because we're draining Rockwood Reservation on that hill coming down, down the road, on there. So my only concern, of course, is just drainage, on there. We needed to elevate, of course, and we were instructed to do a slab, to mitigate the same situations that are here. So we went through this whole process, that was part of the process, and where we put the house, and which addresses Teagarden's question as well. So, but yeah, just the drainage, which I don't think is the issue tonight, on here. So that was, to Kevin's point, a big concern.
But it could be Mr. Miller from his standpoint. What are your thoughts on pushing, if this house gets pushed closer to the road, let's say more in line with your house? Any thoughts on, from what you've seen, what that would do to,
I don't
just
pretend
from living there, what do you think in that area it might do? That would be the concern. Is I don't think we've heard a professional opinion from if that would help, hurt, or
the main flow. I mean, if you could put that slide back up there, there's a main trough that goes. Okay, yeah, if you had the one with my house in there. But right where his driveway connects to the house, that's about where our rear trough, or halfway to the house. Yeah, that's where the main drainage trough goes through right now. It's also where the tip is on the updated floodplain. That's where all the water flows into, from my property into this property.
This tip,
Right in that area there, right where the house is going to be.
and your house is right here,
A little bit further forward, but
this way.
yeah.
Somewhere in.
But we mapped the drainage to go, down the side of the property, to come out. Well, you can see the line right there in front of that tree. That's the drainage trough that drains through all the properties to the west of us. And so that was my concern. It still is. Where it actually winds up, which is the northwest corner there. You guys did make some address in that. But just so we don't have standing water there in that aspect. So if you raise that house up 14 feet, I mean, it's going to create a barrier and a wall there. But how, again, this goes back to drainage and how they do the rest of the elevation and stuff, which is not the point of tonight. But that's.
but it was a stipulation in the new recommendations.
It seems like that's been addressed, that
Okay.
there has to be someplace for the water to go. And as long as we're not, creating a lake, up there, which is what they addressed, and that's good. It was my question, 3 different times last meeting.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as that's taken care of, that would be our big issue, just the watershed aspect of it. And it comes down hard and fast, down there. So I don't think people are prepared for that.
So with the city's contingency that they read, that would add to address your concern. If that is addressed and included in the contingencies, you would be satisfied?
On the drainage aspect, I like, again, I don't know what the rest of the grade elevation is going to be. I don't know how they would do it. I'm sure there's smarter people than me to move from that line that's there up to those 3 36-inch culverts. That's going to take some backflips, to move the water, but
From here, you mean?
right up to the
Up to
culvert,
there.
to those. But if that gets the water moved, through, that addresses my primary issues on that. Yeah.
Eunice, do you want to add anything? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chair, I have a
Yes.
speaker's card from Jessica Egler.
You could please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Road. I am neighbor just to the left, far left of the property as it's shown here. So I am adjacent along the creek. I live with Eric Teeter, same house.
We'll get you sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Ms. Ziegler.
There was a question asked earlier about how many 100-year floods we have seen in a given period. I have seen 4 at least, and possibly 5 in the 9 years that I've lived in my property. So that certainly seems to indicate that FEMA's maps may be a little incorrect if it's supposed to be a 1% chance just from statistics. My question is that we seem to be hearing 2 different things. We seem to be hearing that there needs to be a 14-foot tall mound built to elevate this out of the floodplain. But then we hear that this property isn't actually in the floodplain per the cross section. Well, if it's not actually in the floodplain, can't we just avoid this problem by not building a mound and just have them build at ground level? I don't think that that's a very serious suggestion. I don't think that the property owner is going to agree with me on that because I think that they know that there's a risk to flooding here. And again, I live on the hill. It's great on the hill. You get a good view. That would completely avoid any question of variance here, still give the property a residential area. And I wanted to thank the board for their ongoing patience in considering this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ziegler.
Mr. Chair, Todd Muskenny.
Could please state your name, address, relation to this property, and then we'll get you sworn in.
Todd Mashaney, 3540 Whitsett Sport Road. So I'm down at the far west end on the south side of Whitsett Sport Road. And my concern, I'm
just a moment, Ms. Shaney, we'll get you sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So I'm not real familiar with this end, but I guess my first question is how does the water flow? The reason I ask is I'm having a current wwater flow issue on my property all the way up there to the tune of cubic yards of debris piling up, 7 to be exact, under that 2019 rainstorm. And so, this bottom land changes and substantially. Boulders come down out of these hills. I've got a slab that moved down by the creek that's twice as big as this table, as well as trees getting knocked down, the Remington Heights Bridge blew. So it's ever evolving, I guess we can say. So my question is, it looks like topographically the water would flow from that the corner of the little red square to those 2 triangle areas to the right, down by that barn. Is that true, or do we know? How does the water dissipate from this property? I mean, we're talking about those drainage tiles. Obviously, it runs from west to east. But where then does it go? Does it go through that other home property? Does it go south towards Park Creek? So that's one big question I have. Associated with that then would be the engineering study was performed on Carr Creek. Was Hamilton Creek considered in that whatsoever? And if so, what, I mean, did it have any bearings or was it not even looked at? And why, I guess, if it wasn't. So I'm just trying to maybe just find answers for clarification before we the board makes a decision on this proposal for this property. So associated with that, I asked how much fill was there, because is the home's fill above the road? I can't tell from my, I've been real busy, so I haven't spent a lot of time on this whatsoever, but it looks like the home has priority over our road. And if it's so, that's a concern of mine. And I'd asked how many cubic yards of fill was actually in the engineering study. Because you're filling in a floodplain. There was that orange square that was concrete or flat work that was done, as well as the fill. And then the home, so all of that is going to be an impervious surface, so there is more water runoff. And I get that the flooding from the Merrimack River won't have a bearing, but will the local rain, the local storm have a bearing? And where does it go? I don't know where that water is going, whether it's Hamilton or Carr, and then whether that has any bearing on the engineer's report. And it's, well, I guess it seems unusual to have a big concrete slab out there, and I just wonder what that's for.
Are you talking about
that orange square?
This one right here?
Yes. So those are 4 of my questions. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I have comments to read into the record from Mark Braumeyer. He says, I agree with the observations and comments that Eric Teagarden made this evening. Also, the footprint of the house could be reduced.
Okay. Are there any other speakers in the audience that wish to speak in favor or opposition to this request? And then on the Zoom feature.
Mr. Chair, I see no raised hands.
Okay. You certainly don't need to add anything, Mr. Nance or Mr. Keister, but is there anything that you would like to address from a standpoint of some of the things we've heard? And I'm sure the board has a few questions too, if you'd be willing to come back up.
Yes. So there were a few questions that were raised. And this is probably not a comprehensive list, but just what I was able to jot down. There was a question about the home to the west and any other adjacent homes being addressed in the calculations. They were within the flood study that was submitted in February. And those were considered in both the existing and the proposed condition. So where the no rise calculation was shown, those adjacent homes were considered in both cases. There was a question about Hamilton Creek, if that was considered. It was not. Hamilton Creek's confluence with this home is about 1,600 feet downstream, but it's an adjacent, or it's a wholly separate waterway than what's being studied here. We're focusing on Carr Creek. Having said that, the HECRAS model does take into account effects from the Merrimack's backwater. So it's not assuming that the flows just drain out freely on Carr Creek. It is factoring in whatever the high water elevation on the Merrimack would be. And that backwater is accounted for within this no rise study. And there was a question about the home's elevation versus the road. The road across the frontage of the property is at an elevation of approximately 450, and then it looks like it drops about 5 feet across the home's frontage. As we discussed earlier, the base floodplain elevation is about 448, I believe. I don't have my report in front of me. There will be 2 feet of freeboard required above that, and then that will be the lowest opening for the house, in this case, the walkout basement. The finished floor of the main level would be about 9 feet above that. So the finished floor elevation would be roughly 11 feet above the 100-year high water elevation. Like I said, I don't know if that was a full list of the questions that I raised, if there are any more.
So doing the math, it would be a little bit higher than the road.
Correct. Yes. Yes, it would be.
Because I think I heard earlier that the BFE was 442.8, 443, let's call it. You know, you add 11 to that, you're 450, you know.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't bring that
That's
report
okay.
up with
That's
me.
okay. But the answer to the question that was raised is, yes, the house will be
Yes.
a little bit higher than the road.
Yes.
Do you know the overall water flow? That was an interesting question.
Can I get my report?
You sure can. Being a visual person, if we put one of those aerial shots back up, I'd love to see kind of as we.
So the study runs from the western end of Carr Creek to the east towards this site. The flows vary just as you had more watershed to the site. At the home location, SEMA's hydrologic values are about 2,030 cubic feet per second.
And what does that translate to? Just
in terms
I mean,
of the
a lot, is that a lot? Is that moderate? What is that on the scale of just how much this thing is flowing?
That's kind of a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
I
Sounds
guess
like a lot.
I really don't have any other
Okay.
waterways values known at the moment. Like, I'm not sure what the Merrimack would be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bigger waterway that
Sure.
has substantially more watershed contributing to it. But again, that would be 2,000 cubic feet at that cross section passing every second.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would hope the engineer might be able to answer this question. I think there was one of the speakers inquired about the amount of fill
Yeah, that's good.
necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was next on my list. I don't know if that's between you and Mr. Nance, if you guys have an idea of what it's going to take.
We're able to calculate that now. And I apologize. With our drawings, we were looking more at areas that would be inside the floodplain, not total fill.
Mr. Chair,
Mhm.
with the assistance of Ms. Keefe, could we go back to the colorized drawing that she prepared? If you look on the section of property on the north side of Witsit Fork, there's a series of dashed lines. Those are, I believe, are reflective of the setbacks associated with the property there. So there is a little building envelope, but as you can see, I believe it's about 50 feet or so, 60 feet in width. Thank you.
Oh, that looks.
it's a small window if they stayed within the setbacks. Is that correct?
Certainly, but
Yeah.
as the board understands, setbacks are something you can vary if you choose to.
Sure, sure. So if they were to choose to, and I see a lot of lines here, and that means that, you know, it's pretty steep.
Foot drop.
But if you could do that, you know, or maybe even closer to the road, they could request a variance for a setback that's different than what the city would normally require, correct?
Certainly.
Yeah.
The property owner could request a variance from 0 feet to any distance up to 50 feet for the front yard area, and similarly for the side and rear from 0 to 30 feet.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
One more quick point of clarification. The square in the orange, that was going to be grass, not concrete, correct?
My understanding is that is planned to be concrete.
It is concrete. Okay.
Yeah, if you could just please come up to the microphone. Please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in. And you're the owner of this property.
I can't hear what he's saying.
Come a little bit closer, Mr. Johns,
Do you want me to repeat it?
please.
Yes, please. I thing you said.
Billy Johns, 5338 Mirasol Manor Way, Eureka, Missouri.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Johns.
That is a raised up backyard. That's what it would be, grass with a small pool in the middle of it. A patio next to the house, but 80% of it's just going to be grass. But we wanted to keep it up in case the water ever did come up, the water would come off of it because it would be angled towards the creek. So water would deflect it. It wouldn't just like go up and hit the house. So that's not that big.
Any other questions for Mr. Johns?
No, but this is, like I said, it was my dream house. So that's why it's hard. It's hard the same way everyone that lives in this neighborhood, they all love this neighborhood. They love it. And just when you go in that neighborhood, if you go in the property, you'll see how much you love it. So that's why it's hard for me just to give up and just walk away, because it's already like it's already belonged to it. So if I go down, I go down with the property. I fight as long as we have to fight. But that's what it is. I know that's why, if not, everyone else would have already left. Everyone would have moved out of there. All that water, everybody hates that water, but everyone still wants to live there because it has spirit, it has meaning. So it's the same way we like it. You can't see it or you can't touch it, but you can feel it. So, but anyways, no, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I do have a question. I'm still fuzzy on the basement versus a slab and that. And I know Mr. Miller said that part of his consideration in building the house was a recommendation or a requirement to have slab. So explain the lowest accent point, and Mr. Leafield hop in on this. Does that change this discussion? If there was no finished basement, does that lower the house? Does it? I think we talked about more fill being brought in, and I'm not understanding that aspect. So if anybody can.
Actually, Joe, the 2 feet above freeboard would be 2 feet. The line would be 2 feet. The basement floor would be 2 feet above that. So that's why you've got a whole nother level. I think the remark was to add fill. If you did a basement with fill up against it, you would mound more dirt up, if I understand that right. So it's like a 2-story house in the back. and then one story in the front with the drive coming in, if I understand this correctly.
Correct. The wish by the petitioners to have a walkout basement. The requirement for the freeboard is to the lowest opening elevation. In this case, because it's a walkout basement, the bottom of the basement would be the sill or the lowest opening elevation, but that's what needs to be elevated 2 feet above the calculated 100-year high water elevation.
So if you don't have a basement, what's your sill then becomes the
It
main
depends
level.
what kind of openings you have in the back. If you have windows, if you have lookouts, it really is what your opening is within that floor.
If it's a walkout. And unless I don't understand walkouts correctly, the bottom of the door is the opening, right?
Yes. the
Well,
bottom.
if you don't have that walkout, okay, you could, in theory, drop that house down a lot, 6 feet maybe. If it's an 8-foot high basement, you could drop it 6 feet and still, well, you could drop it 8 feet for that matter, because you wouldn't have
Technically.
well,
when
technically,
when
you don't have any windows or anything. I get
but
that.
then the whole basement would have to be designed for the flood criteria of the county building code. So, why don't you guys explain?
Around you.
It does get a little complicated, but if it's not a walkout, but just a standard basement, we have typically held the position that we want to see 2-foot freeboard for the bottom of the basement, not to the low sill, to make sure that it's considered reasonably safe from flooding. Because you have to consider the vertical elevation of that basement and its potential that it could flood relative to the 100-year flood elevation. So we typically hold the building to be 2 foot, the basement 2 foot above base flood elevation. In other words, it doesn't make any difference. Unless they get rid of the basement, it doesn't make any difference.
Right, I think that was a question. If they
Yeah, that's-
were to remove the basement and it be a slab, then you would gain that height, or it
If
would.
there's
lower
no
the home.
basement, yes, it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
most property owners don't desire that outcome, frankly.
Right,
It
sure,
would
we
certainly make a
understand that. We're just making sure that we had our heads wrapped around what that really meant. Yeah.
Any additional questions? Ms. Bromeyer, if you want to.
I feel like there are a lot of variables here, and I would like to ask the board before any decision is made that there should be another study showing a much shorter driveway and built on a slab and see how much filled dirt is there. Also to know how many cubic yards of feet and how much water displacement that's going to make, because you can't really make a decision without knowing that. And I would ask the person who wishes to build on our street, I would say, yes, it is a lovely place to live until the water comes. And then you stand there in fear that your whole basement's going to be flooded and all your possessions are going to be ruined. And we don't want that. Right now, Wildwood has protected us by sticking to the rules. And we don't want to have future problems. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Ms. Bromeyer? If moving the house closer to the street, what would you like that report to say? What is that?
If you moved it to the street, then you don't have, he wants to build on, he doesn't want such a steep slope going up. So he's making a very high mound of dirt. If he didn't have a basement and so you lowered it down 8 feet or so, that's 8 feet less, then he could pull it closer to the road and still have the same slope. I'm thinking, but I'm not an engineer, and that's why I'm asking someone to do a study.
And then how does that help the neighbors from the floodwaters? That's what I'm trying to understand.
There's less fill dirt brought in to displace floodwater. But that, in my head, that seems to be, if you go from a big mountain down to a small hill, there's that much less dirt that's going to push floodwater around. I may be wrong. Like I said, I'm not an engineer, but I feel like that would be useful information to have. Okay.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is if you move this closer to the road, all the fill necessary to create a building site isn't there anymore.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And also because our neighbor already testified, the house right next door, you can see the line where the water goes. It is heading right for that wall of dirt. And if that wall of dirt, yeah, right there, if that wall of dirt is not there and it's sloped a little nicer, maybe there would not be a problem. And that's why I'm asking, this needs to be figured out. And I'm not an engineer. Somebody needs to figure that out and see if it would make a difference.
Mr. Mashani, is that correct? Sorry, I may have gotten that wrong.
So again, it's for the questions for the engineer. You
Mhm.
stated that the Hamilton Car Creek wasn't included in their model. And if you go to St. Louis County's website, it has an overlay of the from FEMA maps and the properties. And so I don't know if we even have something with even the old floodplain maps. And so
For those not as familiar with the property, can you, Ms. Keith, do you have the laser pointer to help show us where Hamilton Creek roughly is? If it's even.
Isn't it down here?
that's the Car Creek, and then
That's
Hamilton
Car
Creek is the bridge that you come over into the neighborhood.
Okay, so roughly this in the tree line here.
Correct. So
Okay.
then where that line of trees are on the property, remember there was that little bump out, and that's why those drainage culverts are heading towards those trees in the driveway. Right. And if you remember, there was a bump out of probably floodplain, I don't know, floodplain. Okay. So the corner of his property is very close to Hamilton Creek. Again, that little bump out appears to be coming from Hamilton Creek versus the confluence of the car is way down here. That little bump out section is much further up. I mean, it seems like it would be relevant, and maybe not, but I mean, if you go to the firm maps, it sure looks like it.
There's something about us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, I don't know. Thank you again.
There was flooding in this residence, right? Right. Mr. Brown, do you know?
What I was going to reference was the blue lines on the drawing that you're looking at are the sections from the hydraulic model, and the number is the reference number on those sections is the distance in feet above the confluence with Hamilton Creek, just for the record. But as the petitioner's engineer stated, the Merrimack is what controls once you get downstream from the property. That's what controls not Hamilton Creek, but the Merrimack is the overall control with regard to the flood elevations once you get further downstream from the property.
So it drops quite a bit according to the blue lines here. Towards Hamilton Creek, that is.
That's just the distance. It's not the elevation, it's just the distance. Along the center line of the channel for Car Creek to the confluence with Hamilton Creek. Just for reference sake. But again, hydraulically, it's the Merrimack, the backwater from the Merrimack that has the control. It controls the elevation of the flood, the 100-year flood in that area downstream from the property, not Hamilton Creek.
Question, Mr. Sprunger? Okay. Any additional speakers in the audience? Ms. Keefe? Mr. Teagarden, you have something?
So I had a question that I think I'd asked earlier that I would like to ask the engineer. So I know that there was a section that was created at 1597 here. And I think the question that I'd asked earlier that I don't think was one of the ones that you'd addressed is I know that was updated data, like updated topography data for 1597. And I want to know, was there similar updates performed at the adjacent cross sections? So like 1971 and 1222. And or is there any impact from like a boundary condition sort of perspective from those cross sections such that having only refined data in the local area might give you an erroneous result compared to a wider spread update of the area being modeled?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Teagarden. Mr. Keister, do you mind elaborating on that?
There were no topographic surveys performed of the areas on either side of this home. But what would happen if the data differed from what the flown topography showed is it would be the same in both the existing and proposed conditions. So again, with these no rise calculations, we're looking at present day existing conditions versus the proposed. If, say, for example, section 810 differed by a couple of feet off what SEMA showed, that would be reflected in our existing condition calculations and in our proposed. So there would be, if there was a change in the high water, it would be reflected in both conditions, if that makes sense.
Go back to your first statement, said it wasn't. Why wasn't it?
Why was it not included?
Okay. So like 1971, you wouldn't because it's not on the property. That's the reasoning behind not looking at. I think Mr. Teagarden was saying, did you kind of as a whole encompass all of this? Take a look. That would be.
Yes. So I guess, you could expand this to the whole length of Carr Creek. We could go out and survey every area and update every section. But again, what it's going to show is that we've done that survey. We've entirely confirmed what the existing present day conditions are. And then with the proposed, we're still building off that same set of values, only we're adding this home's grading onto it. So whether it was upstream or downstream of the property, that section is going to remain unchanged in either condition.
Thank you. This time, would anybody like to hear the opportunity to hear the oral presentation of the department's report? Seeing none. Any final remarks from the department?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the board, as was noted at the May meeting and here tonight again, the Department of Planning is recommending approval of the variance as presented. There are a set of conditions associated with that recommendation, that favorable recommendation. And as was noted during our discussion tonight, there has been an additional condition added relative to the drainage along Whitsett Fork Road and ensuring that it is positive drainage once the completion of construction of the dwelling is, once the dwelling's completion is achieved. If there are any questions, obviously, Mr. Young, Mr. Keefe, Ms. Keefe, Mr. Brown, and I are available to address them.
Thank you, Director Munoz. Any final comments from the board? Seeing none, we will close this proceeding for a vote. Can I have a motion to approve, a motion to deny, or a motion to approve with conditions? do want to remind the group prior to any kind of motion, we can seek a continuance to
Well,
discuss, Ms. Bromeyer brought up, a few questions. So that is on the table from a board standpoint to seek a continuance, just throwing it out there.
I guess I would maybe just chime in here a bit. First of all, I think the city has done an absolute great job of taking this variance request into consideration and putting on conditions that would hopefully mitigate all the issues. So I commend the city, the department. I do think there are still a lot of outstanding questions, but
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Young, should we officially take a step back? Or are we appropriate to? Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure to keep this on the record.
I'm sorry, what did you mean by step back?
Officially, we did close the proceeding for a vote. Is there any formal motion I want to make sure Mr. Sprunger's comments are on the record and still in right order.
Well, as far as his comments.
Can we have discussion as the board, even after the
Yes,
closing?
Absolutely. Debate is appropriate. Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Sure. That's okay. So anyway, I was just saying, I think the city did a great job. I do think, however, there are still quite a few outstanding questions and concerns, and I think there are other options that maybe would be available to the petitioner. So I think I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to actually deny the variance request as submitted.
Okay. We have a motion to deny the request as submitted. Do we have a second?
Mr. Chair,
Ian,
without a second, motion fails.
Correct. So that motion to deny fails. Do we have a motion to approve, deny, or approve with conditions?
I think I'd go ahead and make a motion for continuance based on gathering of additional information related to some of the questions that were raised in tonight's hearing.
We have a motion to continue this to the July meeting for the purpose of gathering additional facts, clarifications, input.
Yes.
Do we have a second for that motion? Seeing there's not a second, that motion too is denied. So we're back to a motion to approve, a motion to deny, or approve with conditions. Unless there's another option out there, Director Vunich or Mr. Young is uncharted territory here, no pun intended.
Mr. Chair, I will defer to the city attorney on this particular one.
Mhm.
Mr. Chair, you've stated what the options are. It's to approve, deny, approve with conditions. You can postpone it to the next meeting if you seek additional information. If you want to think about it until later in the meeting, you can table it until the other two items have been addressed.
The other, is there,
agenda items.
okay. Right.
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Sure.
Mr. Young, if there is no motion, what does that equate to?
If no motion is made, it'll be on the next agenda until it is disposed of.
So we've, again, as Mr. Young said, stated the options, the one that Mr. Young did bring up, an option to table somewhat temporarily. But
I mean, we could, I don't know if that, solves anything or not. I think if the petitioner had no other options, I would maybe feel a little bit differently about this, but I think there are other options that maybe would be better than this one. And that's why I feel like it's okay. I kind of regret to even do it, but, I'm going to remake a motion to deny the request. Or is that?
could you hear those options in July?
What's that?
Those options could also be discussed in
They
July.
could. They could. They could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I could live with that. So you need to maybe make your motion.
All right, then I'll go ahead and make another motion for continuance to the July meeting for purposes of gathering additional information on alternatives or lack of alternatives to the current proposal.
So we have a motion to postpone to July's meeting for the reasons stated as by Mr. Lux. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll go ahead and second it.
So we have a second to that motion. Thank you, Mr. Sprunger. Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Sprunger,
Yes.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Lux,
Yes.
and I as well vote to continue this at the July meeting based on the reasons Mr. Lux stated. We'll move to the next petition.
Mr. Chair, the next petition is BA 15-24, Stephen Herring, 84 Strecker Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63011. Care of Kurt Kataki Architectural Plus Design LLC, 348 Buckington Street, St. Peters, Missouri, 63376. Requests an exception to the minimum yard requirements general for the purpose of constructing a master bedroom and kitchen enlargement addition to an existing single-family dwelling that is located upon the property situated at 84 Strecker Road, locator number 22U 310020, which would thereby authorize a southern side yard setback distance of 17 feet in lieu of the required 30 feet from the property line. This new addition, as proposed, would be aligned with the existing side elevation of the residence. This request is contrary to the requirements of Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban Resident District Regulations of the City of Wildwood zoning ordinance. This particular property is located in Ward 4. And again, before Ms. Keefe begins her presentation, the department would like to enter into the record the following items. Chapter 400, Article 2 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the Board of Adjustment. Chapter 415 of the same City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the zoning ordinance. The file that has been developed and maintained by the department regarding this particular request, and all contents contained therein, including the department's recommendation and report. And then finally, any evidence that is offered as part of tonight's hearing, which will include testimony, exhibits, plats, and etc. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, our second case this evening involves a subject lot that is located in far eastern Wildwood, where it meets with the city of Ellisville. It is located just north of Highway 100, and it is on the west side of Strecker Road. The subject lot is surrounded by a mostly denser residential development, especially to the south and to the east. Though it is surrounded by larger lots similar in size to it, just to the west and to the north. The subject lot is rectangular in shape, and it consists of lawn area with dispersed trees. There is an existing single-family dwelling on the lot that was built in 1951 prior to the present zoning district, the non-urban residence district, being applied to it by first St. Louis County and then the city of Wildwood. The single-family dwelling has 948 square feet of total living area. The property does have a gentle slope that descends from south to north of it. The petitioner is requesting to build a master bedroom and kitchen enlargement addition to the rear of the existing dwelling. The existing dwelling, as noted, was built prior to the present zoning designation being applied to it. And is situated upon the lot just 17 feet from the southern property line. The petitioner wishes to build an addition that is adjacent to the present living areas of the home, which are on the southern portion of the home. And therefore, it is proposing to align this addition with the southern edge of the home as it is currently placed upon the lot. This would authorize a 17-foot southern side yard setback distance in lieu of 30 feet, which is required by the non-urban residence district. Here I am showing the proposed floor plan submitted by the petitioner. So you can see that the existing living areas of the home are indeed on the southern portion. There's a breezeway then connecting it with an attached garage on the northern portion of it. These renderings were also submitted by the petitioner. This is what the front of the house will look like after the addition, and this is what the rear of the home will look like after the addition. This is the front of the dwelling, looking west. These pictures were taken during the site visit. This is looking north on Strecker Road. And this is looking south. This is looking across Strecker, across the street from the subject property. This is the front lawn area looking northwest. And this is the front lawn area looking southwest at the development to the south. This is standing at the existing dwelling looking east across the front lawn area. Here we're at the southern side yard setback area at the existing dwelling looking west. This is an existing privacy fence at the existing dwelling and the properties just to the south. This is standing in the rear yard looking southwest. And this is in the rear yard also looking southwest to give you a larger perspective. This is the rear yard looking north. This is the rear of the dwelling looking northeast. This is also looking northeast. And this is another view of the rear of the dwelling looking east. The department has received 6 comments pertaining to this request. 4 are opposed to it. 1 is in support, and 1 was commenting on a larger policy issue but did not state a position. It should be noted that 1 comment in opposition was from a non-existent address. So it was an anonymous commenter. That concludes the department's presentation. We are available for the board's questions and comments at this time.
Do we have a petitioner online?
I do believe the petitioner and their representative is online.
Any questions for the department? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you'll give
Yes.
us a second to promote the
Absolutely.
petitioner and petitioner's representative, thank you.
Good evening. Is it Mr. Kostecki?
Okay, sorry. That was a perfect pronunciation, by the way. Thank you.
Every now and then get it right. And then well, I guess we'll start with you. If you could please state your name, address, relationship to this this petition, and we'll get you sworn in.
Okay, my name is Kurt Kostecki. I live at 348 Buckington Street, St. Peters, Missouri, 63376, and I am Stephen Herring's architect, representing him this evening.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And then it looks like we have the Mr. or Mrs. or both the Herrings. Is that correct?
Yes, we're here.
Would you like us to go ahead and get you sworn in so you guys can both kind of interact as we go through this?
Sure.
Okay. If you could please state your name, address, relationship to this property, and then we'll get you sworn in.
Deborah Herring. I live at 311 Strucker Road. I'm one of the owners of 84.
I'm Stephen Herring, also 311 Strucker Road, 63011, and 84 is the house that I'd purchased.
Okay. We get you sworn in here.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Okay, as the architect here, Stephen approached me about this project, and so I went out there in February and did a thorough site visit and walked the entire property, walked the house. It's got very good bones. It's had a lot of work done before it was sold to Stephen. A lot of base work done in the basement. The foundation's really solid now. All the structure, the floor structure is very solid. And the roof structure is very solid. The only thing that's really dilapidated somewhat is the siding, and that of course will be replaced as part of this renovation. So it's got really good bones. So it'd be a real shame to tear it down. And it's definitely to me a hardship case in that this house was here long before the setbacks were created, and we're not asking to encroach any further. We're asking to put a 14-foot addition in that direction that's flush with the house, just so it looks like part of the existing residence. So I know there have been some comments about the setback and doing that encroachment, but again, we really feel it's a hardship, and all the living space is on that side of the house. So if it weren't, I could obviously put it on the other side, but it works obviously the best where I placed it. Let's see what else. The addition is less than 400 square feet. The entire length of that side of the site is 420 feet. And this 14-foot addition makes up a little over 3% of that. So it's not like it's going to be any, big hindrance to the neighbors to the south, because they're actually sitting up a lot higher anyway than this house. And it's only a single story. The work that's going to be done in this house is going to greatly improve the appearance that it currently has. So, we just feel it's a win-win for the neighborhood, because it's going to increase the value of the property as well. So, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Stephen.
No, not really. We thought this was kind of an easy thing. This is the first time we've done this, and I thought it'd be pretty simple procedure. I was kind of surprised to hear that there's opposition, because and when in reading some of this, they talked about roof lines. Well, the roof line is the exact same as what it's going to be, and it doesn't hinder anybody's view in any direction. I don't know where that came from. So anyway, no, Kurt explained it very well, and we just want to make it look nice. We've already been working on it. We want it to look nice, and we're hoping we get approval and we can move on with it.
Thank you both. Any questions from the board? Thank you both, and thank you for your patience as we work through the first variance there. Thank you much. Any other? Well, first, let's see. Anybody else in online audience that would like to speak in favor or opposition to this request?
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody like to hear an oral presentation of the department's report for this variance request? Seeing none.
read it already. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That wasn't for me. Never mind. Sorry about that.
No. Any final comments from the department?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the department is supporting this request. It is the most logical placement for the addition. It preserves one of our older residences in the city and creates less site disturbance to it. Honestly, in another year or two, the Historic Preservation Commission would have to review it if it were being proposed for demolition. We do believe it's compatible with the abutting land development pattern, and we haven't heard any comments from those affected neighbors that are right next to the addition. That we've listed several other findings as well as in the report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments from the board? This time we will close the proceeding for a vote. Can I have a motion to approve, a motion to deny or approve with conditions?
I'll motion to approve.
Mr. Lux. Do we have a second to approve?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Approve.
Mr. Sprunger?
Approve.
Mr. Lee?
Approve.
Mr. Lux?
Approve.
And I as well approve. Congratulations, your variance is approved.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
again.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. We now have approved the minutes from last meeting. About what I have here.
You need a motion.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes as recorded from the May meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Sprunger, Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Approve.
Mr. Sprunger,
Approve.
Mr. Lee,
Approve.
Mr. Lux,
Approve.
and I approve as well. Minutes are approved from the May meeting. That does conclude this meeting, and so we will adjourn. Thank you.